Welcome back to Bleav in Softball. I'm your host, Jenna, and it is the season 4 premiere of the show. I am so happy to be back. And because it's year 4, I've been telling everybody I feel like a senior now. Like I feel like 2023 is my senior season in college or something like that. And the 2023 season for softball is here. Not only is it opening day for the show, but it's also opening day for D1 college softball, which is, the most wonderful time of year. So however you got here today, just some reminders for the show. It's available on all the major podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, you name it. It's also on video. So Bleav in Softball is also on YouTube. Subscribe there. You can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Twitter at Bleav in Softball. That's BLEAV. And yes, the music you hear was written by my dad. The OGs will remember him as a guest from season 1. He was my lifelong softball coach, and he calls it Dirt in the Skirt. So just a fun fact for any A League of Their Own fans out there. All right, let's go through today's batting order. First, we'll be covering our bases. I'll share some news and callouts from around the softball world. Then we'll head into today's interview with Peyton St. She was literally player 1 on team 1 at Duke. She was also their P1. So she's just really used to being first. So I'm excited that she's starting for us this season as well. Then we'll end things with the foul tip of the week, which is the segment where we share tips to help us get better. All right, let's go. Covering our bases. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your Super Bowl betting this season. Get analysis of every play, prop, and point at BetOnline. You'll find the latest odds and team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. With betting options for everything, from the national anthem to the halftime show and even the Gatorade bath, BetOnline is your Super Bowl headquarters this season. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to check out the most comprehensive Super Bowl info on the web. Don't forget to use our promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit to get in on all the betting action. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. And for us, we know 2023 softball is starting. And when you look back at 2022, I said this in our season 3 finale this past fall, but it was really just a year that felt relentless. It was historic. It was poetic. Right? Like it was relentless because there were so many upsets in college softball from day 1 throughout the entire postseason. And there weren't really any gaps in the schedule. Like it was straight from college to pro with AUX and WPF and then international and travel ball as always. So we just got so much softball. And then obviously historic with things like Jocelyn Allo with the home run record and Carol Hutchins being the winningest college softball coach of all time, retiring. We got some prime TV slots this past year. And it was the first time we got to see the WPF and AUX actually in the pro circuit. And then it felt poetic too, because it was the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And there were just so many stories that unfolded in 2022. Like, for example, Team USA getting redemption against Japan at the World Games. And really the list goes on. But I felt like it was such a cool combination of firsts and lasts, rookies and veterans, new school and old school. Just a really cool balance. And for 2023 softball, I feel like truly the sky's the limit. College softball this year, it's 40 years of the NFCA, the Coaches Association. Like we're celebrating 40 years of it. It's wild. There have been some cool things in the offseason and updates, like Patty Gasso signing a landmark deal for $1,625,000. Like that is a big deal for a coach and someone in our sport to make that kind of money. It sets a precedent for us. Couple new rules too that have been added, for transfers. You can't just transfer and start playing for a school right away. You got to wait a little bit. And there's also now going to be a third assistant coach that's able to be paid and on staff, which is long overdue. Then we have, preseason tournaments coming up. Clearwater and Mary Nutter are back as usual in preseason, but also cool is that Clearwater is sponsored by Tax Act and presented by Evo Shield. So those are signs of growth as well. When it comes to the Power 5, some interesting things through every conference, as usual. But just to hit on the surface, in the Big 12, OU, obviously the defending champs, might be able to three-peat. And that is just such a huge deal. I can't even explain how big of a deal that is. Yes, they lost Jocelyn Allo, but the returning hitters like Tiare Jennings. And let's not forget that they gained some huge transfers in the offseason, like Sid Sanders, who was the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year at Arizona State last year. Then you look at OSU, right? Or they have Kelly Maxwell. So Bedlam's going to be fun, to say the least. And then you take a look at the SEC, and it's just as wide open as it's been in a while in terms of who's going to win that conference. Florida was picked to win in the coaches poll. They had 5 votes, but also Tennessee had 3 first place votes. I don't know if things are usually that dispersed or that split. And then you got to look at the rest too. I mean, Arkansas, Alabama's roster is a lot different, but they still have Fouts. You can't really count out LSU, Georgia, Kentucky. I mean, they're never going to roll over easy. So it's going to be a fight in the SEC this year. And then you look at the Pac-12, the first conference tournament ever this season. Could be good momentum for this conference. 7 teams ranked in the preseason poll, the coaches poll, all but Cal and Utah. So only the ones who didn't go to postseason last year, but I still think they can surprise people. Like, they are scrappy, they are tough, and they want to win. And 3 teams are obviously coming off of the Women's College World Series appearance last year, including UCLA, who also benefited from transfers, by the way, with Charlize Palacios, Janelle Maonio from Arizona, as well as Brooke Yanez, the lefty, who was the ace at Oregon. So they are locked and loaded. In the Big Ten, Northwestern at the top, ranked in the top 10 as well. I would say also keep an eye on Nebraska. Michigan is transitioning after Hutch leaving too, but they're both receiving votes. And then, of course, you got to look at Danielle Williams. I mean, after what she did last year in the circle for Northwestern, got to watch her this year. In the ACC, there are 4 ranked teams. Florida State is picked to win, which is not a surprise. But Clemson and Virginia Tech also received first place votes, too, even without Keely Richard for Virginia Tech. And then, of course, there's Duke, who's also ranked. So this is a really competitive, and like I've said before, just a conference on the rise. But then look outside the Power 5. It's UCF's last year in the American Conference. So they're really gunning for it. They're getting ready to get in the Big 12, but they're trying to finish strong as well. And they went to Supers last year. Jada Cody's back. Jen Salling, the Canadian Olympian, is now on staff. They got a lot going for them over there. And I would say keep an eye on them as well. San Diego State, too. We saw them in the postseason. Stacey Newman and her staff have really just led that program to be so competitive. And I'm really excited to see what they do this season, too. And then the junior college circuit, the NJCAA, announced a media deal with ESPN for nationally televised championship games, as well as regular season content on ESPN. So when we talk about growth of the game, we're talking about all levels. Flipping to the pro softball side. So it is technically the WPF's first official full season this year, because last year was sort of an exhibition. So the regular season is going through June 15th to August 7th. The Champ Series will be in mid-August. They're expanding as well. So there are going to be 4 teams. They're adding a Texas team, Oklahoma City Spark. Michelle Moultrie was the first signee there, and they've also acquired Jocelyn Allo, so we can still watch her in her greatness. And then Smash It Vipers, they were the first team in the WPF last year, but they've relocated to Oxford, Alabama. And then, of course, we have the USSSA Pride out of Florida, which has been on the pro circuit for a very long time. On the Athletes Unlimited side, as an organization, they raised $30 million in the fall from a lot of different investors. Kevin Durant, just to name one as an example. AUX and the AU regular series are going to continue both in Rosemont this year. So the condensed AUX season starts on June 9th, literally, as the World Series is ending. And then the championship series starts the weekend of July 28th. So with their partnerships, they're also expanding. And this is cool because this gets into the travel ball scene and youth softball. They're partnering with Alliance Fast Pitch on the Stars of Tomorrow game. And Alliance Fast Pitch, we had Tony Rico and Holly Pierce on the show last year. They told us a lot about it because they were some of the early adopters and ones who were able to establish it. Basically, athletes from high school classes in 2024, 2025, 2026 will be competing in mid-August, and it's going to have teams and scoring like the Athletes Unlimited format, and they'll be doing it in Rosemont, and college coaches will be able to watch them. So that's pretty freaking cool. And then another series, the Professional Softball Series, is launching, and it's going to start with Florida Vibe playing a series against Team Canada. And then there's more to be announced from there, but that's also coming this summer. So that's quite a bit. Then you look more on the just nationwide side of things. USA Softball is celebrating 90 years of developing the game in the U.S. since 1933. Totally a different life. That's almost a century of USA Softball, which is incredible. On the international stage, some changes. Monica Abbott retired from the Japan League, not retired completely from softball, but from the Japan League. And then Iri Yamada, who's a Japanese Olympian and longtime pro player, also retired. So some movement there. But without softball in the Paris 2024 Olympics, it's always now the road to LA 2028. And I could go on and on. I kind of did, and I will. That's what we have all season for. This is just the first episode of 2023. And someone who's used to being first, like I said, is today's guest. So let's head into the interview. She is an Athletes Unlimited pitcher, Duke alum and All-American, 4-time All-ACC honoree, trailblazer, and mental health advocate, Peyton St. George. Peyton, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this should be fun. And you know what? I actually had your coach, Marissa Young, your college coach, on the show back in season 2. And I loved learning just about building the Duke program from scratch from her. But I'm also excited to sort of hear it from your side, the player side, among other things, too, when we get to talk today.
Yeah, definitely year 2, we call it the terrible twos, just because, building a culture had a lot of ups and downs, but I'm sure she had a lot of great things to say. Now that she looks back, she can probably laugh at most of them.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure you can too, right? Like you're known as player one. Like you were the first one to commit to Duke, which is the first ever program that Duke has had in terms of softball. I guess I know I've read and seen some of your interviews where you're like, yeah, I just sort of knew I felt at home, but why do you think you felt at home at Duke?
Yeah, it was really weird. I mean, she showed me a big grass field and she said, I wish I had a stadium to show you that might, sell the school to you a little more. And to me, it was, the name Duke speaks for itself. She didn't need a stadium to sell to me. She had a vision and I was on board. And, just getting to say that I was player one of team one, I don't think I would have been able to get that anywhere else. And when I was in college, the short shelf life of collegiate athletics, it's really hard to try and, put that into perspective when you're in it. And I think the more time I'm out of college now, I finally see, wow, what player one really meant. So it definitely was weird and strange at the time, having a group chat with just me and coach, and then it slowly started to grow. But the more time I'm out of college, I definitely see, what player one meant to me a little more.
And what do you think it meant to you now that you've been able to reflect?
A lot of people had always said in college, you must be facing a lot of pressure. You're the first player, you're the first pitcher to come on board, trying to build a culture. And I never really felt pressure. I think obviously there were standards that I wanted to reach. And personally, as a pitcher, I'm also a people pleaser. So I wanted to go above and beyond for coach, for my team. But I think now that I'm out, it just meant that, I'm going to come back as an alumni and I'm going to be known as player one. And now that my jersey's up on that outfield wall under All-American, I think it just means a little more now that I was able to, cement my name in Duke softball history as player one. But I wanted to leave there as an All-American, and I did. And so I have, no regrets looking back, and I was able to reach my goals, which is, the best thing I could have asked for. And taking my team to an ACC championship and then a super regional, it really, exceeded all expectations I had when I was player one as an 18-year-old versus now as a 23-year-old.
I don't think you can overstate to how big of a deal that is. Meaning we always talk, especially athletes, we're so competitive, right? We're all about goal setting. We always want to get better. But to actually reach your goals is another thing, right? And sometimes it's almost hard when you do, yeah. Because then you're like, oh, well, now I have to create new goals, right? And have you experienced some of that since you've finished your college career?
Honestly, not really. Even playing professional, it was something that I felt kind of, out of the loop when a lot of players would be like, playing pro is my dream. It's what I've wanted to do since childhood. And for me, playing professionally wasn't something that I grew up playing softball being like, that is my end game. That's my end goal. I think, I'm very much of a take it a day at a time person, but I'm also a person that, me playing professional, it isn't, who I know or the connections I have. I can attribute that to every single day of the hard work I've put into it. And I mean, playing professional, it's so much fun, but, obviously it's not my main source of income. So I look at it as, kind of something fun I do to continue my legacy as a softball player. But it is nice, be in the real world and everything. But leaving Duke, I had a lot of goals, but since the beginning, team one and team two, our goal, team one and team two, is 40 wins. And, I tell that to people and they're like, 40 wins, like you guys were out of your mind. And so, when we did get 40 wins the year after COVID, and then, the next year, Team 5, everyone was saying, you've reached this huge landmark. And to us, it was, we saw less of that and more of but we fell short year 1 and year 2 because we know we had every capability to do that the first 2 years. So I don't think there's ever a goal too big. And obviously, last year I wanted to end my season in Oklahoma City. And obviously that fell short at super regional. And I think when you're in season, it's really easy to say you fell short, but once you're out of season, it's, easy to reflect on all of the things you did do. But, it was never a question in my mind that we didn't deserve to be at the Women's College World Series. And there is no goal that's too big. So, go big or go home.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I feel like that is the mentality that Duke softball has and that Marissa Young has. And I know she was a pitcher too. So I'm sure there's been at least some sort of connection in that regard with your experience there, because we always say, right, like there's a circle drawn around the pitcher for a reason.
Yeah, she definitely is a bulldog, and you can't get anything by her. She's been through everything. She's 3-time All-American hitter and pitcher. So it goes back to, me being a people pleaser. I never wanted to disappoint her. I knew all the things she's accomplished. So just hoping that, I can make her proud and do half of the things she did would be an amazing career for myself. But knowing that, I've been learning from the best, and when she asked me to do something completely outrageous, I'm not going to question it. And being in the bullpen with her every day was truly something that made me such a better pitcher and just a better learner. But more importantly, outside of all the physical stuff, it was just more of that mentality of, what does it mean to be a pitcher? What does it mean to, someone sees your name on the starting lineup and they're kind of like, oh crap, we're facing St. George today. And it took me a few years to realize that and, really kind of encompass that as my mentality, that I wanted to be a pitcher who, it was tough finding balance being a pitcher who wanted to have fun and smile a lot, but also be a pitcher that was, once I got the sign, I was mowing this pitch down the batter's box. Like I'm saying, get out of my box. I wanted to be that tough bulldog pitcher, just like Marissa was. And so having her to learn from, there couldn't have been anyone better to model myself after.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a privilege, and it's great that you even recognize that, because sometimes it's hard to, in the moment, recognize that sort of opportunity that you have. And I talked to her actually a little bit about, I was like, do you agree that pitchers almost have to be like a little bit crazy, or just like they're built different, like to want to take on that responsibility? And she was like, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it.
She definitely taught me that you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's the reason now why, when I got to Athletes Unlimited and they were kind of getting the gist of what I throw, when I like to throw it, and they kind of were saying, what's your bread and butter, your favorite counts? And my answer was, call any pitch in any count. And in my head, I'm like, that's a testament to Marissa Young right there, because me 2 years ago, I would have been like, oh, I want to throw my best pitch at 3-0, or I don't want to throw change-ups if it could be a ball 4. And now that I've gotten to the pro level, it's, you're going to get those best hitters in the world by throwing them off guard. So it's really hard for them to pick up patterns when you can be unpredictable. So that's definitely everything I've learned from Coach Young.
I love seeing that in a pitcher. Like throwing a changeup on a 3-0 count, for example, I'm like, awesome. Like go for it, right? Like it, and you have to like build that confidence, obviously, to get to that point, but you can only build it by doing it, right? So I think it's cool that you had that sort of influence from her, and that you sort of took it and made it your own.
For sure. And, I like how you said building confidence, but it also comes from just failing a lot at something. And then the big thing for me is, I think when I was younger, a lot of times the worst case scenario would always creep in my head, and then it would happen. So, now being an older pitcher and professional pitcher, I know the worst case scenario in a 3-0 count, throwing a changeup, is a walk. And, I've walked, plenty of batters trying to throw a 3-0 changeup. But now that I know the best case scenario is that, now I'm 3-1 and they're not expecting that and they can come right back with it. I think building confidence and failing a lot go hand in hand, definitely.
I think I actually saw you sort of describe this in the past, meaning the buildup of the program and how you were part of it with Coach Young and the team. And I think you mentioned it. The three things you mentioned were that it took growth, grit, and failure to build.
Sounds right.
Yeah. You're like, yep, all those check out. But explain to me why those are the three things that you decided to describe it as. You just mentioned failure a little bit, but the growth and grit piece.
Growth was definitely a big thing for me, being a freshman pitcher that was kind of thrown to the wolves and now being a fifth year pitcher. We were big on slogans, finding one word that you could come back to and center yourself. And when I was a freshman, sophomore, junior, those words to me were, attack and competitor. And then as I got older, I started making those words, almost things that I wasn't as good at. Like my fifth year, I remember we were about to go play UCLA and I wrote on my mirror, throw the changeup for a strike. And it wasn't a slogan that, motivated me because I didn't lack motivation. It was a slogan that was something, UCLA is not my enemy today. I'm my enemy today. Because if I can't execute that, then, I'm only hurting myself. So I think growth was a huge piece for me, and just softball IQ. You're going to get a higher IQ from repetition, from studying the batter, and realizing that at the end of the day, you know yourself better than the coach sitting in the dugout. They're there to help you reach your potential, but you know more about yourself than anyone, and even your catchers sometimes. And, that goes hand in hand with grit. It's, to me, what are you willing to do in the off season or even in season to reach the top, where there's a lot of cases where, you might get to postseason and say, oh, if I had lifted one extra day a week, I might be throwing harder right now. But for me, I never wanted that to be a question in my mind. And since freshman year, I was lifting, 4 days a week, even on game days. And I found that was something I liked, and the weight room became my friend. And there were days when I wasn't motivated, but I was disciplined and I stayed consistent with it. And, even hitting some PRs in May, like that was a huge thing for me, where on that scouting report, you can't say that I'm getting fatigued as the season goes on, because if anything, I'm getting stronger. So growth and grit, and then, definitely just a lot of failure, but learning how to fail forward, like I talked about a little bit, is huge.
Yes, failing forward. And most of failure is forward, right? Like, but it's hard for us to realize that in the moment that that's the case. But once we kind of take a step back and understand it's helpful. And I love a lot of what you just touched on was a lot of self-awareness too, because I don't know if you can really grow if you're not self-aware, right? It's like, well, then how do you know what to grow, how to grow, what to focus on? And so just knowing yourself and learning about yourself seemed like it was a really big piece of it too, which I think is so important, especially for, young players who are listening to this and watching all of you, whether it's college players, professional, anything, do what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And, luckily I was fortunate that I did get a lot of playing time when I was younger, my freshman and sophomore years. So I had a lot of time to grow, and I had a lot of time to reflect on failure. Whereas, there might be a lot of college pitchers out there who they don't get their moment until they're a junior or senior, and they have to grow really, really fast, and they have to be self-aware, really fast. So I think, I had the privilege to, mature slowly, I guess one would say, when being thrown to the wolves as a freshman, but then having, 4 years down the line, I can look back and say, wow, I got to physically work through my outings, good and bad, where, a lot of pitchers might not get to do that.
Yeah. And you made a really good distinction a little bit earlier too, between motivation and discipline. And this is actually something I've just been thinking about personally, like in life, like not just softball, right? But just in life. You can be a really motivated person. And sometimes though, like we're not motivated every second of every day. Like, we get tired. That's why we say, okay, give me 100% of whatever it is you have. It's not going to be your total 100% every single day. If you have 80% that day, then give 80%. And that's your 100% for that day. But the discipline piece, doing it anyway, like having that commitment, even if your motivation wavers a little bit, is so important. And I think it's really key that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And even like there's so many small examples of that too. And I think it's, Coach Young and the whole staff, my whole 5 years, were so big on the little things. They all add up to make big things when you really need them. And if you cut corners, it's going to be a big loss. But, if you're doing things every single day, you're going to have big gains. And, the first example, I was talking to one of my old teammates the other day is, I was telling them, oh, I'm getting PTSD from, training camp in January when you come back for break. And it's really, really cold outside. And I was thinking, I hated the days when I came in after, 2-a-days, and the only thing I wanted to do was go get a hot meal and a hot shower. And a lot of times when I was younger, I would walk right by the bands. I would go straight to the locker room because I was like, it's going to take me 30 seconds. It's so much easier not to do. But when I was telling my old teammate, like, those are the things that my 5th year and senior year, I hated doing at the time, but just staying disciplined and something as simple as doing recovery bands after a freezing cold practice, like that's what's going to save you in May. And like it took me a lot of growth to realize that when I was a freshman, I was headed straight for the showers. I was not doing my recovery bands. I was freezing. I was hungry. And it really is just a lot of little things that add up.
Oh, I can completely relate to that. But exactly what you're saying, that is exactly what you're talking about. I actually remember at Stanford, our practices when I played there started at 2:30. Like that's what it was at the time. And I remember, yeah, right. It's like, yep, that's about right. So you can take those morning classes, eat your lunch, and then it's straight to practice. But I remember I stayed to do a co-term degree, which is like a master's degree essentially. So I got to stay for a 5th year and be a regular student, which I loved personally. But at around 2 p.m., that first like quarter of classes, I was like kind of on high alert because I was like, normally I'm supposed to be doing something right now, so I totally relate to that too. Like over time, you'll get more used to it. But yes, it's so ingrained.
Yeah, it is weird, not being in college now and having so much free time. And obviously, I got to do my master's last year, and honestly, that was like undergrad on steroids, which, everyone tells you that it is. So doing the master's in softball was a lot. But now that I went from like 100 to 0, and I feel like I'll be at work some days, and it's so weird not having my day planned out by the minute. I'm like, this is normal, like free time, like you can go read a book or something. But it's so weird, seeing all my old teammates saying training camp and run tests and preseason. And I'm like, do I miss it that much? How much do I really miss it? But I like my free time for sure.
Totally. I mean, we end up missing the outcomes of all of our hard work. But like, the grind every day is hard. So it's like, I don't know if I need to do certain lifts or any of that stuff ever again, but I mean, you're still playing professionally, so you're obviously going to still be training and doing all of that. But, but the camaraderie that comes with sort of being in the trenches together is, it's like irreplaceable really. And there's like a special something to it.
Yeah, it definitely is the topic of conversation when all of the alumni get together. Like, do you remember when we had to do this? And just thinking about like team 1 and team 2 was a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds coming in. And I can only imagine Coach Young trying to, get some grit and mental toughness out of us, which is why we were doing some of the insane things that we did. But the camaraderie is definitely something I miss. And told one of my other teammates, like, I don't miss the training camps and the run tests. I miss, going to the locker room after that kind of stuff and going to get meals together. It's definitely something when you're in it, you don't realize that, those are the good old days, which sounds cliche, but it's so true.
It is true. But you're right. You don't notice or realize it until you're removed a little bit from the situation. Yeah. So welcome to the alumni crew now. That's so funny. Well, you know what I love too is seeing that when you were getting recruited, I think you had said before that your pitching coach was like, well, do you want to break records or do you want to set them? And that was such a cool just mentality and way to think about it to me. And I feel like you also, like you were part of the first class of the D1 Player Society with D1 softball, like first NIL deal with the Durham Bulls, the minor league franchise, like out there near Duke. So you like to be first.
Yeah, I do like to be first with a lot of things. And, when my pitching coach said that, I was looking at some other big schools, and it wasn't even that it was, me being player 1 and building a team. That was never an issue to me. I think it was, do I want to, and you can't even say, do I want to settle with Duke? Because that's not settling either. But of course, everyone's in your ear, keep your options open. And there's a lot of different people telling you different things. And at the end of the day, my parents and my pitching coach, he made a good point with the setting records, which, I eventually got to break my own records. But when you're done with softball, unfortunately, this isn't something where we can make a full-time income off of, maybe in the future. But when you hang your cleats up, you need to choose a university that is a 40-year decision, not a 4-year decision. And Duke is exactly that. I mean, and it's already proven, when I went to interview for jobs, this is kind of where I was really seeing the effects of the Duke degree. And I'm sure with the Stanford degree, but they see your resume, they're like, oh, Duke. And so in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, the suffering and the grit and the 6 a.m. workouts was worth it. Especially, trying to balance both. And it really is student before athlete most days because, you're not eligible. Obviously, you can't play. And so, breaking records and setting records, it really wasn't a question. And there is no settling at Duke University, I think, and even Stanford University. The standard is through the roof in everything that you do, which is also why I loved it. And is also why, we had a goal of 40 wins our first 2 years. I mean, we got the Duke standard right when we got on campus. It wasn't, hey, you guys are an infant, you're in your infancy stage of a team. Like, we're going to take it easy on you. We're going to set goals that you might be able to blow through the roof. Your first year, it was, no, we are hitting the ground running. Like, you are not going to be the one Duke team that, kind of waltzes in here. Like, welcome to championship culture. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, and the environment like that does make a difference. There's a Duke standard and then there's a Duke softball standard on top of that. And I think that standard, you talked about how like there's academics and there you got your master's degree as well. And I feel like you've done a good job at embracing those opportunities off the field. Because like you're saying, this is really like a lifetime decision that you're making to go to a place like Duke. But there are other things that you're also doing now in addition to being a professional player. And I think I saw that you did the ACE program, the Athlete Civic Engagement Program. And I know about that program because I know that some of the Stanford girls have done it as well, which is really cool. So I think, why was it important to you to maybe mention, I guess, so that the listeners understand what the ACE program is, but then why was it important to you to just take advantage of those types of opportunities?
Yeah, obviously, being a student athlete, you've sacrificed a lot to get to the level of college, but the sacrifice doesn't stop in college. You have to sacrifice a lot of things that normal students get to do, such as traveling abroad for a semester. There's a lot of things that you don't get to do. So Duke and Stanford had an immersive program. You got to pick from 4 countries and you really got to go and see the culture. And luckily I was chosen to go to Vietnam with 4 other Stanford athletes and 4 other Duke athletes where I taught English and baseball. And this was an opportunity, I would have never had if Duke didn't, create the opportunities for their athletes just because they want there to be that championship culture, but they also don't want you to have to sacrifice a lot of the things that other students would get to do. And, Duke and Stanford being at the top of the medical fields and everything, they have a ton of resources and academics and just everything that they do. So if I wasn't embracing the opportunities they gave me, I would be not doing myself a service, but it was really important to me, not like just to use college and use softball to open a door to an education. But then once you open that door, there are so many different floors of more doors to open. And, one of them just happened to be the ACE program and civic engagement and going to Vietnam. And another door in my 5th year happened to be NIL, which is where I got a lot of my opportunities from. And I ended up putting my NIL deals on my resume, and that's how I got my job with Teamworks and Influencer. So I was never a person that was going to sit back and be content with where I was. I was always looking for something else, whether that was, opening doors to be the first class of D1 Players Society. Just always looking for new things to do and opening more doors.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so important, which is why I wanted to ask you about it, because I think it's easy for us to get caught up in softball. It's easy for athletes in general to get caught up in their sports. But you're right, the student part is so important, and it really feeds into the rest of your life. And I think it's been very cool that you've paid attention to that at a young age, because I think it's hard to, again, one of those things that's hard to really know or truly understand when you're in it. But I like the foresight that you've had and been able to take advantage of so far.
Yeah, when my season was like coming to an end, kind of when I knew I'd have to be hanging up the cleats for at least Duke at the time. And my dad was very big on, when you're sitting in the dugout and you realize it's the bottom of the 7th inning and you're like, oh crap, we're losing by however many runs. Like, I'm about to lose my last college game ever. And he said, do you want to be sitting in that dugout and have no idea what you're doing after college? Or do you want to be sitting in that dugout and you have a plan so that when you walk out of there, obviously, you're going to be emotional, but when you've closed a chapter, you're ready to open another chapter. And so I think, being at a place like Duke and even, with Stanford, if you're not taking advantage of those resources, you're doing yourself a disservice because it's so available to set yourself up to have a plan, whether that's, career networking or, going professional. It really, being at Duke has put myself in a position to not only have a plan, but have multiple plans. I could have been content with being an athletes unlimited professional athlete, but, I wanted to get a good job as well. So all of a sudden I went from having no plan to having, 2 to 3 plans. So when I was sitting in the dugout at UCLA and obviously very emotional, I could walk out of there and get on the bus and know that when I get back to Durham and I have to pack up my stuff, I'm ready to open a new chapter because Duke has given me the ability to just create opportunities for myself and I have a plan. So it made it a little less emotional, obviously still emotional, but good to know that, I had at least the next few years of my life set up before me.
And that's really the goal. I mean, the even bigger goal than the championships and things, which of course everyone's going to strive for that no matter
Mhm.
what. But that is truly what it's all about. And it's interesting because, sometimes at least the days can feel really long in the 4 to 5 years
Yes,
that you're doing that grind.
very long.
But then when it's time, like when it's time to graduate and to move on, that can kind of happen really quickly. Like your year last year, 2022, you started out as a student athlete going to Duke, and then you finished as a professional softball player. And there was a lot
Mhm.
that happened in between, right? So, but you had to build up to that for that to work out the way that it did. It's not like it just fell into your lap. Like you really took the steps to try to carve out a path for yourself.
For sure. And, I had talked to Jen Schroeder at preseason. She came around to Duke and, when she did her little like country tour and, kind of asking me my goals for the season, obviously, working hard, but, telling her my goal was to be an All American, but, you can't really, just like you can't force being All American, it just kind of happens, but it doesn't happen immediately. It happens, since you step foot on campus in August. Everything that you're doing from that point up until May when those, All American announcements come out. A lot of people might think from the outside, oh, they had a great season, they deserve it. But really, it was no, like you should have seen the hard work I was putting in the off
Mm.
season and everything I was doing to get ahead on my studies so that I can sleep more and be well rested for weights. And, there's just so much that goes into it. So even being drafted to play in Athletes Unlimited, it wasn't one of the things like, man, I've had a really good season. Like, I feel like I deserve to be drafted. It was more of like, dang, all the sprinting and the early mornings and the late nights with homework I did, that is paying off now, seeing this Athletes Unlimited draft. Because without that, I wouldn't have been able to excel when it was my time to shine on the field. And, every moment counts. And people listening are be like, that is so cliche, but like every moment really does count. Cause like I said, it comes down to the little things because they all add up.
Well, sometimes cliches though, they come from somewhere,
Yeah.
like there's a reason why people came up with this and why we say this. And I think you just summarized it really well. And I think the thing that I know that you care about a lot too is throughout that process, right? Because we've talked a lot about like, well, the steps you have to take, the overall process, like how much time it takes, all those things, but sort of how do you stay mentally healthy during all of that, because it is really hard. And I actually saw in one of your D1 Player Society articles that you wrote, you're talking about balance and how balance actually, it means you have to sacrifice something though. Balance
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have everything. Like there have to be sacrifices for you to be able to remain mentally healthy, physically healthy, emotionally healthy, all of those things. And I loved what you said because you said it's about trying to continue to do the things that help you find balance so your mental health doesn't become the sacrifice. Why is that so important to you?
It's really important to me because I think it goes back to growth when you're thrown on a college campus and, there are some resources to help you transition in, but, and it kind of was to me, I have a nutritionist, I have an academic advisor, I have an athletic academic advisor, I've got sports psychologists, clinical psychologists, weightlifting coaches. You got the whole nine in front of you, and everyone there, it's their job to help you succeed at your sport and at school. And it's really up to you to figure out, not only time management and getting enough sleep and doing your homework on time, but it's really, how to have balance. And balance is such a loaded word because I feel like a lot of people don't understand that balance requires sacrifice. And to me, sometimes, sacrifice to me is, getting a 0 on a homework assignment that's not worth much to get 2 more hours of sleep, because I know that if I'm up till 2 a.m., I know in the big scheme of things, like this homework assignment is so small in the big scheme of things. And this isn't me telling, if people listen to this and they think, oh, Peyton's skipping assignments, that is the opposite of the point that I'm trying to portray here. It's really just, its sacrifice comes in all different shapes and sizes. And some days, I did want to lift 4 times a week, but some days on my optional day when I would go an extra, I would turn that day into yoga or something because I knew I had a big live session at practice later. Or if a lot of my friends are saying, hey, let's go get ice cream, and I haven't seen them in a few weeks, maybe I go get ice cream with them and I lose a little bit of sleep because I know that eating with people is scientifically proven to increase your happiness. And there's just so many ways to shape sacrifice in a way that does create balance. And it took me a really, really long time to figure that out, that trying to find ways, because I felt like, even as any athlete, you have a full cup when you wake up, and every single day you're pouring that cup into different areas. And if you're not actively filling that cup back up, there's going to be nothing left to pour, and it's going to catch up to you. And to me, that was, trying to find ways to fill up my cup, whether it was going to get ice cream with my friends, or going to the stadium a little bit early and just hanging out with the coaches, or getting ready for practice, or buying myself flowers, or watching a movie, or skipping a homework assignment that was worth 1 point out of 100 points of my final grade to get extra sleep. There's so many things to do, and that's why you really have to rely on your teammates. And there were so many times in the season when, Coach Young would say, like, did anyone know so-and-so was struggling? And there would, a lot of us would look around like, no, we didn't know that. And, Coach Young can say, you guys might have the best culture in the country, but if you're not getting below surface level, you're doing each other a disservice. And I think that's where we got really, really close because, it kind of hit us that, oh, like nobody knew this freshman was struggling. Why aren't we having those uncomfortable conversations? And, we can say we're really close and our culture is really good. And it was, but if you're not, leaning on one another, and I know that goes back to athletes not wanting to ask for help, and it's kind of a big vicious cycle. But once you get really close, it kind of translates to the field, just because if I know my roommate didn't get much sleep last night, I'm not going to harp on her for an error she made at practice because she already knows. So it's just like little things like that. Or, if you see a teammate is down, don't let them walk through the locker room with their head down. Ask them what's wrong, or bring them some lunch if they don't have time to get lunch, because a lot of times athletes won't eat, and then you'll see their performance suffer at practice. So that was like a very long-winded answer to your question, but balance really is about sacrifice, even though those are two completely contradicting terms. And it does take a lot of growth to recognize what you need to fill your cup, because every single day that cup's going to get empty really, really fast.
Well, I think long-winded, sure. I felt like it was just a lot of wisdom, though, because, and honestly, that's great coaching, firstly, too, by Marissa Young, to even bring that up. Because here's the thing, and you mentioned this too, like we talk about how we need to get rid of the stigma and just talk about these things more. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people are like, okay, I get that. Okay, maybe I'm on board with that, but how do I talk about it more? And that right there, what you just said, her being like, did anyone know that so-and-so is struggling, is a way to do that. And not only like she opens up to you all, that person was open with the team by even sharing that with coach in the first place. And then you all are open with each other. Like that is a great example of how to do this. Cause I think sometimes it's hard to know how to start. So that's a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And it is really hard to know how to start. And luckily at Duke, we had sports psychologists. One of our, infamous sports psychologists, Greg Dale, who actually just passed away a few weeks ago. He was with me all 5 years, and I'd walk into his office and he'd have a box of tissues ready just because he knows that each session was going to be a little rough, but they got better. And having him for sports psychologists and performance, but also having clinical psychologists, hearing the word psychologist, it is really intimidating because it kind of, again, it's the stigma that I'm seeing a psychologist because I need help or because something's wrong with me, where I don't think people realize that, having a mental disorder or, mental health issues, it is a physical altercation in your brain and something is wrong. And, why would you treat that any differently than you would a sports injury? So, unfortunately, there's not every school out there has the resources for those athletes, which is why social media and people like Victoria Garrick on social media, who are such big mental health advocates, who played professional and college sports, and a lot of professional advocates out there. Like, there are so many different avenues that you can, get support. And obviously your teammates should be where you can go first. And if you can't feel like you can go to your teammates first, then maybe that says something about your culture, where why aren't you feeling vulnerable enough to talk about that with girls you're going through the trenches with, like, and why are you're getting closer to doing all this hard stuff together and being gritty and mentally tough. But I think true mental toughness comes down to being vulnerable when it comes to your mental state. And luckily I felt that I was at a place where I could do that. And our coaches had an open door policy where, you can come in and you can say what's bothering you. And Coach Young didn't care if, your boyfriend broke up with you that day or you got a bad test grade. Mental health comes in all different shapes and sizes, and it doesn't always have to be about softball. And luckily we got to meet with Greg Dale every week. So, we were fostering some of those conversations on a team level, but then again, meeting with him individually really helped. And Coach Young even started implementing a mental health day where, you get one a semester, and it's kind of just, if you wake up that day and your mental health's really struggling, you can take a mental health day. You don't have to come to practice, and it's no questions asked. All she's going to do is ask you, what can I do to help you? Are you okay? And if you need to rejuvenate yourself by driving to the North Carolina beaches that day, take a few hours and go, or, go shopping or go get your nails done, or maybe you just want to sleep. Like, she was just so helpful in terms of knowing that every player was so individualized, and it took so many different things to fill up each of our cups. And, I remember there was a mental health day where I think like 5 or 6 people had taken a mental health day and exams were coming. And she finally was just like, let's play dodgeball and go get ice cream. And, stuff like that, that is going to fill up my cup, those 2 hours I'm spending. Cause I'm the type of person that if I know I have a huge assignment or, my mental health is not that good that day, and this is from Greg Dale, I try to be where my feet are for those 2 hours of practice, because I'm going to make it worse if I'm trying to do a bullpen and I'm already thinking about the exam I have tomorrow. And that goes back to sacrifice, sacrificing your worries for the assignment for tomorrow for where you are right now. And that's about, finding balance back to that. But having a coaching staff that is so supportive and having the resources at Duke with clinical and sports psychologists, it goes a really, really long way. And I know the NCAA just, they just admitted some rules that is trying to help mental health awareness, which was great to see. So it's still baby steps. There's still a lot wrong with it, and athletes aren't speaking out enough, and that's because of the stigma. So hopefully, if I'm just one person that can help eradicate a stigma for other people, then, I'm doing my job.
Yeah. And that is, again, like more so what it's all about too. Even more than the accomplishments on the field is the impact that you're having overall. And I just think it's so important too, because we also talk about how, we don't just have to talk about these things during Mental Health Awareness Month. Like we can also talk about it anytime, because mental health isn't just happening during Mental Health Awareness Month. And so to make this like a regular topic that you guys are not only discussing, but also just trying to work on, I think, and being open about it is really important. And, they even say, we used to say in college all the time, like, you can pick 2: good grades, sleep, and a social life. Mm-hmm. That's just for any college student. That doesn't even count the student athletes with their sports, right? Like it's hard. And I know that you had mentioned before in one of your articles that sort of questioning, why do we romanticize the grind? Like there's a difference between grit and just grinding it out, And I think that's a really important distinction too, because we have to sort of redefine how we think about what's productive. To your point,
Mm.
sometimes getting ice cream with your friends is productive. Sometimes rest, sleep is productive. Like we have to think about like what is actually going to be productive for me in the long run. So I think this is all really, really helpful.
Exactly. And like to your point, not just talking about it in May when it's mental health awareness month, and you can post all you want on your story and Twitter and repost things, but if you're not continuing that conversation in your homes and your stadiums and your dorms, then posting it's a disservice because you're not continuing the conversation. And that's why at the beginning of the season I wanted to do something that publicly showed my advocacy for mental health, and to me that was wearing a green ribbon every single game, just because I know, like you said, there's a circle around the pitcher's mound for a reason. And rewatching my film, it was like a light bulb went off. I realized like that center field camera is on the back of my head every second of the game.
Yeah.
Why don't I change the color of my ribbon from Duke blue to green and show that if someone's going to watch me pitch, they're going to say, oh, that's the Duke softball player. But, or, I would rather them say that's the Duke softball player that is an advocate for mental health. And knowing that I was going to be on ESPN and ACC network, I wanted to make that a statement, and I wanted to make it known that, hey, I might be this successful pitcher, but I've been in the trenches of, physical tiredness, but also, that's what every college athlete goes through. But I've also been in the trenches of mental health. And, once I started wearing that green ribbon, I slowly started seeing, younger travel ball teams reaching out to me saying, hey, our whole team is wearing this in favor of you today. We want to be like you. We want to show our support for mental health. And that's when I truly realized like something as small as a green ribbon, but it's being showcased on national television. It's making a wave of difference. And it goes back to, we have a group at Duke called Morgan's Message, and seeing the wave that they've had in the entire country, just having an ambassador program at, dozens and dozens of schools now, seeing how many athletes are starting to speak up. But luckily, I'm able to wear a Morgan's Message ribbon in Athletes Unlimited, and they're my nonprofit partner. So a percentage of my winnings, what I get, Athletes Unlimited writes a check to match that to Morgan's Message. So it's really cool just to continue the conversation. But I think, there's a lot that players can do. And I understand that there's also players who struggle in silence. And, I think one of my favorite quotes, the greatest battles that we have is the struggles of our mind and what goes on when, no one's watching. So hopefully a lot of athletes, help to end the stigma. And even if, you're not struggling with mental health and you might not know what it's like or feels like, that was me when I first got to college. But, there's a lot of different forms of mental health, and you don't have to be, diagnosed with depression, anxiety to feel the strains of that on your body and your mind. So I think there's a lot of different levels of it, but the stigma is still there, and hopefully, over time it gets better.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things about Athletes Unlimited too, is your ability as players to contribute to the causes that you care about the most. I think such a cool element to it. But is this experience that you've had, is this part of why you decided to be a psychology major?
Being a psychology major, I actually, was really, got a lot of my major done my freshman year because I took a lot of psych classes. Luckily, Duke doesn't require you to take a lot of gen eds that other schools do, so you can really jump into what you love right away. And I knew that I love psychology classes. I think I've always been a super reflective person. I like how knowing the mind works. But still, I was a psychology major, and it still took me a year and a half to reach out for help and to realize, I got to college and I really undermined mental health. And to me, it was like, I'm not depressed or I'm not anxious. I'm not struggling with that. I'm a winner. I'm a fighter. Like, I'm not going to let that, I'm not going to succumb to the pressures that mental health is. And again, it was the stigma. And that's what I was reacting to, was the stigma. But even knowing how my mind works and still thinking, that's not me. Like, I'm not struggling. And it finally got to a breaking point where I couldn't hold it in anymore. And, went to see my psychologist, Greg Dale, went to see some clinical psychologists, and just trying to undo some of the thinking of the ways that I was on the mound and outside. I think it made me want to be a psych major even more as my major got more intense and more specific to the subjects I was studying. But it really is, psychology helps in all aspects of the game. And also, getting my master's in business, psychology helped with that. And even just like consumerism and everything. Like my teammates always said, you're the ideal consumer. I'm like, well, that's because I know how I operate. I know know my habits, but psychology and studying the mind has always been something that I've loved to do. And now that I don't think about mental health with a stigma, it really like, it's pretty black and white. The way you think, there's a reason you think like that. And it's really just
Mhm.
about undoing the way you think and then transforming that into a different way of thinking, which sounds really complicated, but with habits and consistency and looking at things differently, like our team always said, we cope a lot with mental health struggles with humor. That's just how our team operated. And so when someone says like, I'm having a really tough day and joking about the mental health day and just kind of reframing that thinking to like, hey, if you're really struggling, like take a day. Like no one's gonna no one's gonna hit you on the back of the head for that one. Like if you're really struggling, sleep in. Or I remember I took a mental health day and I was still at Lyft. And everybody was like, why are you at Lyft if you took a mental health day? You should be sleeping in. And I was like, Lyft is something that fills my cup. Like I love the weight room. So if I had slept through weights, which is something that I really enjoy doing and I love my strength coach, that's just going to take away from my cup. So, I'll miss out on practice later and I'll rejuvenate myself then, but lifting fills my cup. So, I'm still going to be there for that. And, other people they're taking their mental health day and they don't want to touch a softball. They don't want to touch a weight. So it really, it's just so individualized. And having my major from Duke in psychology has also just shown me new perspectives on it too.
Yeah. And how to cope, like you said, the humor piece too. I have noticed like your online presence, you'll talk about like the hard mental health stuff, of course, that I've seen you write about and that we're talking about now. But then I also see so much like so many funny day-to-day things that you're doing on TikTok and just
Yeah.
experiences. And so I feel like that's a different kind of balance. We talked about balance, but that's like a different kind too that is also healthy.
For sure. And, that can also go too far to where if you're always using humor to cope, there's always seriousness to some jokes. And I think that's where our culture took a deep dive to this past season is where, why are we making jokes about that? Is there something underlying that we need to talk about more? And we always joke about mental health and we joke about that, softball is one big gulag and, it is a grind, but, why are we joking about all this stuff? And so sometimes it can go a little too far. And that's where our culture went really below surface level this past year is, let's stop joking about it and, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that it seems you've taken some of these things you've learned over into your professional career with Athletes Unlimited. Like you finished, I think it was 32nd out of 60 athletes as a rookie. Also got the first start of the season, so you were first again. No surprise in your rookie season. But I also read you talking about like one of your favorite memories from that wasn't even necessarily you had some favorite memories on the field too, like big strikeouts and things like that. But also it was like 5 a.m. you and your teammates going out to Lake Michigan and just like jumping in the water and having a good time and how that filled your bucket too. So I can see that this has translated, which is so important, right? Because sometimes maybe we get comfortable with a certain group, but we have a hard time using those tools we've learned in other circumstances. But it seems like you're working on that, which is great.
Yeah, and obviously, professional is full of 60 empowering and confident and just amazing women. And it makes it really easy to do what I love when I'm surrounded by all of those people. And, I tell my parents and my friends back home when I got back from Chicago, like, I have never been in a setting where I felt that I could really do anything I put my mind to. And my opinion is so valued. And, you're around so many confident women that you really feel like you're on top of the world, but everyone is lifting you up and you're lifting each other up. And it really is, it's such a great environment. And my team might have absolutely hated me for making them wake up at 5 a.m. But after we were all floating in Lake Michigan, we were like, this is something you're going to remember for the rest of your life, floating in Lake Michigan at sunrise with thousands of other people on a game day and eating donuts. So it really was things like that where, trying to bring, what makes me happy to my team. And like, you should have seen their faces when we walked out of the hotel and the sun wasn't even up. And I was like, guys, I swear this is worth it. Like, you got to just stick with me. So it really is, a lot of things transition over because they're really just things about life, honestly.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that's why you even said some of your experiences like that helped you with your job search. not
Mm-hmm.
just the things that you've learned as an athlete, as a student, even some of the NIL experience that you had, like all of those things, you take those, you take it into other parts of your life.
For sure. And college athletics is, it's not just a 4-year decision, it's a 40-year decision. And it might seem stressful in the moment, but you're going to be sitting in the corporate world one day and be like, damn, like college athletics is really why I'm 5 minutes earlier than everyone else, or, why my shirt's tucked in. So, like
Yeah.
I said, it really is the little things that college athletics, they keep creeping into the real world.
Oh, 100%. Actually, now you just reminded me, soon after I finished college and finished grad school, I went and did a rotation program at LinkedIn. And I wrote a blog for just LinkedIn's corporate blog at the time. And it was all about like how things you learn as an athlete, how they translate to your job now. And some of it was like dress how you want, because of the, like, if you look good, you feel good, you play good,
Mhm.
you win thing. And like all of those things totally translated. So yes, I totally forgot about that, that I even wrote that, but you just reminded me about it.
Yeah, for sure. And, at the time you're like, oh, I can't wait till this is over. But when you're out of it, you realize how much it had an impact on you.
Oh yeah. And so with Athletes Unlimited specifically, and just being a pro now, what are you looking forward to the most in 2023 based on, what you learned and what you took away from 2022?
In 2023, I didn't think, I mean, obviously, I knew I had more potential in myself as a pitcher, but I was really surprised to know that there was just a lot about myself that I could tweak coming out of college and, mastering that, pitching craft for 5 years. There was still so much more, and learning from people like Rachel Garcia and Danielle O'Toole and Sydney Little, John Watkins, and all the other pitchers that I got to surround myself with. I really just want to continue to, be a sponge to the game and continue to dissect my craft and perfect it at pitching. And when I'm surrounded by all of those amazing people, that is honestly the easiest thing ever because everyone wants to learn from everyone. And I'm just super excited to be back with all of the girls.
Of course. It seems like the most fun. Like I've been covering it since
It
the
is
very
so
first
fun.
season and it just seems like the best. And it's the best to watch. It's super fun, but it just seems like every person I talk to that's ever done Athletes Unlimited talks about how it's one of the best experiences that they've had. So, and I love that exists for professional softball players now. It's great.
Hands down, so much fun. And like, there's obviously competition, but your friend's gonna be up to bat and you're gonna like hit them or something, and then you both laugh about it as they're
Yeah.
running down to first base. Like it is so different than college, and that the environment is so light, but it's also so competitive. So, I mean, there's never a dull moment. That's the shortest thing I can say about it. Never a dull moment.
As it should be. As it should
Mhm.
be. So, as we just collectively, all of us, as we watch and want to support softball this year, what do you think we can do collectively to support mental health for not only college players, but professional players, just in general in the softball community?
I think social media is a big piece of it. You see a player mess up in a really big game, and all of a sudden, they're being ambushed on Twitter and they're being ambushed on Instagram. And a lot of people have a lot to say about, the girls on the field and, why they shouldn't be getting paid more. And there's a lot of politics around it, and there's a lot of arguments around it. But really just have some grace for the players on the field and know that the people you're bashing, they're still kids. I mean, a lot of these players are 18, 19, 20 years old. So, just think about it in a way that, would you want someone talking to your daughter like that? Or would you talk to your daughter like that? Or your mom or your grandma? Or, I know like obviously your mom and your grandma are much older than college players, but, just being mindful of the way you talk about players and know that they might read that tweet after a game and, they're not going to respond to you, but they're going to read that and they're going to take it to heart and they're going to think about that the next time they're on the field. And I was always someone that, wanted to stay away from the negative comments, but they're inevitable. They're always going to be there. So trying to limit that stuff and, just knowing that they're working their asses off. They have a 56 game season. The last thing they want to see is tweets about them after a game or, just being mindful of that and being mindful that if mental health isn't something that you can experience with and relate to, then don't be down on the people that do advocate for it and do speak about it, because it takes a lot to speak about your own experiences and then to get to take that another level and post about it on social media for others. So there's always going to be people that don't understand it and don't think it's a real thing, but just, having some grace with that.
Yeah. Grace is important for each other, for ourselves. I think that's really good advice.
For sure.
Well, I mean, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I would keep going. But I normally play this game called Safer Out with people just to wrap things up who come on the show. And so basically, I will just bring up a topic, could be softball related. And if you like it or you agree with it, you call it safe. If you don't like it, don't agree with it, you call it out. Makes sense?
Okay.
Yeah, you're an umpire. You're an umpire now, basically. Okay, so first one is chewing gum while playing. Safe or out?
Safe. 100% safe.
Did I hear that you kind of have like you love bubble gum? Is that true?
I do.
You have a thing with it?
Yeah, I literally all last season I had to chew gum to distract myself from thinking too much, and it kind of just became my identity. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna roll with it.
I like it. Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's also knowing yourself too, though, right? It's like, well, what helps? Okay, this helps. Great. Yeah, let's do that.
Distracting myself.
Favorite flavor? What's your favorite flavor?
Juicy fruit.
Ooh, okay. Ooh, that's kind of like an OG. All right, I like that. Okay, that was the first one. So first one safe. Second one is shaking off signs. So like as a pitcher. Safe. Yeah. I feel like
absolutely.
You have to, I think I've seen you do that as a college player and as a professional, but in Athletes Unlimited, I would imagine like you really have to do that because these are brand new catchers and pitchers. You're just starting to get to know each other. So I'd imagine it's important.
Yeah, it definitely is. You're trying to build a culture with a team really, really fast and trying to build a relationship with the catcher really fast. And, once you do that more, they kind of get your rhythm. And the quicker you do that and you tell them what you like, the more successful you're going to be. So absolutely safe all the way.
And you were comfortable doing that like in a college setting when it's a coach, like not just your catcher calling it in Athletes Unlimited, but like a coach as well, right? Just knowing yourself.
For sure. It's also just a really good way to build trust and knowing that your coach might call something, but at the end of the day, like I said, you know yourself better than anyone else. And if you want to be truly successful, you just have to be so in tune with yourself. And eventually your coach will catch on and kind of see how you're reacting to different situations. And then you guys can kind of morph those pitch sequences together. So I love doing that. Safe all the way.
I love it. All right. Couple of safes. We're rolling here. So the next one is, and this is for the record, because we talked about this, but just for the record, NIL, safe or out?
Oh, safe. That is like my full-time job now. And I absolutely love it. And I've gotten to do so many things with NIL, like you said, signing with the Durham Bulls, mental health advocacy. I mean, it's such a good way for players to continue to build a brand and create professionalism out of themselves and use their platform. So I think every player should do it, and there's opportunities for everyone. And now it's my full-time job. I'm so much more invested in it and just want to build more opportunities for more players. So absolutely safe all the way.
Well, bases are loaded now, so you're killing it. But also, how do you think mental health, because you're a big mental health advocate, you're an NIL advocate. How do you think NIL affects mental health, or how do you think someone could balance both of those things?
I mean, NIL is definitely like a part-time job almost in college. There's a lot to do. And, I honestly, I did take on a lot in my fifth year season because I knew I only had 1 year to do NIL and I wanted to make the most of it. But at the end of the day, it's going to take time out of something, whether that's, doing something that fills your cup or time out of homework. So you have to balance that as well. And it can be a little exhausting if you're taking a lot because, you are having to give these deliverables to companies and, just communicating with that. And it really is like a part-time job, and companies are treating you like a business. So, having to treat them the same, obviously. But I think it can do a lot too. And it can honestly help a lot of athletes too, whether, you might have mental health distress because you can't make ends meet with paying rent that month. And maybe, some NIL income can help with that. But on the other hand, you might take on too many contracts or too many things. And then next thing you know, you're getting home at 2 a.m. from a tournament and you have a lot of deliverables to give to someone the next day that you haven't started. So again, it really is just about finding balance and knowing that taking on things that you're passionate about and you can handle, in addition to your obviously 56 game schedule if you're a softball or baseball player, and then school on top of that. So there are a lot of pros and cons to NIL. The cons might, just being taking on too much and not being able to know how to balance that.
Yeah. Well, like anything else, and it sounds like you're right. It goes back to priorities and balance, like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. So bases loaded. So last one is bat flips. Safe or out?
Oh, I actually had this conversation with my dad the other day. I was like, I don't have a problem with bat flips. I have a problem when it like becomes disrespectful. If you're running down the line like screaming at my dugout, that to me is when it comes a little disrespectful. But I know hitters are putting in the same amount of work. So, I mean, if it's a big game and it's like a tie game, bottom of the seventh, and you're hitting a grand slam off me, like, go ahead and bat flip. Like, you know what? I don't really care that much. I try to keep my grudges as internal as possible. And, next time I'm like, all right, next time I face you, I'll just work a little harder to strike you out specifically. But I mean, I don't have a big problem with it until it becomes like super disrespectful, but it's the game. The game should be emotional. You see men do it all the time. So why can't women do it as well? I mean, I don't have a huge problem with it. That might be like an unpopular pitcher's opinion, but pitchers do stuff all the time. I'm screaming in your face. You're bat flipping. It's okay.
This goes back to your self-awareness then as a pitcher. You're like, okay, it's all right. Yeah, it is probably the minority opinion for pitchers that I've had on the show, but you're not the only one, and it does range a little bit. But I understand that. So the line for disrespect for you is like if you're engaging the other team, or
probably, yeah. Like if you're running down or you're like cussing at my dugout or, saying stuff to my coaches, or which a lot of players probably wouldn't do. But
yeah,
I mean, if it starts to become not like a passion moment and more of like I'm going to actively disrespect you, that's kind of where I draw the line, because the game should be passionate and the game is emotional. So I don't have a problem with, a player showing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you had 4 safes. So you scored, apparently. Yeah. But it is pretty good. I wasn't sure because, sometimes the pitchers are like out and you never know. You're like in that pitcher mentality. You're used to getting outs. You just don't know. But this was really fun. Thank you again for joining, Peyton. It was really good to get to know you. And I'm excited to watch you for the rest of this year too. And to see how you're doing while you're watching Duke and college softball as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited to watch my Blue Devils, and college softball is just super fun to watch between the months of February and June, and headed off to AU shortly after that. So going to be training for that and getting back into the swing of things. But thank you so much for having me on, and it was really great talking softball and mental health and everything above.
I enjoyed my conversation with Peyton a lot. I think she's just a great example of how you can push yourself and take care of yourself at the same time. And really just a good reminder of how multifaceted athletes are, because we're people first at the end of the day. And with that, let's transition to the foul tip of the week. This week's foul tip is about supporting each other's success. From my viewpoint, life's hard enough. The grind that Peyton talked about is hard enough. We need each other. Community is the difference maker in getting through the tough stuff. And there's a reason why, Peyton's favorite memory from Athletes Unlimited was jumping in Lake Michigan at 5 a.m. with her teammates, and not something that was specifically in a game or on the field. It's the people. And it's easy to feel competitive, even with teammates or friends who may be pursuing similar goals as you. A lot of us have had that friend that might be a little more competitive with us than they are supportive of us. Or maybe you've been that friend. And it's just it's not fun. It's not healthy. It's not helpful for anyone. I do think there's something to be said about the fact that opportunities for women and girls have historically been more limited. And maybe it's then a reaction to that to be more competitive over what is available to them. But realistically, if a woman gets an opportunity and knocks it out of the park, literally or figuratively, that's going to create more opportunities for women. There's that saying that I think of too. That blowing out someone else's candle won't make yours any brighter. And on the other side of that is a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And I love that because if you think about it, in fact, actually everything gets brighter if one candle lights another candle and so on and so forth. Like, for example, if I ever hear about a new softball podcast coming out, I don't feel like so threatened about it. I actually feel like, wow, okay, we're making progress because more coverage of softball and women's sports is the goal. How many football podcasts exist? For example, I'd love for softball coverage to be that big. So it's just a lesson that I learned that at the end of the day, queens support queens. We can all fix each other's crowns. And it really is a concept that doesn't just apply to women, but it applies to all of us. So that's it. Support each other's success. That's the foul tip of the week. You've been listening to Bleav in Softball, part of Bleav Network, and presented by BetOnline. The show is available anywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you listen, including Bleav.com, and you can watch the videos on YouTube too. Subscribe to the show, rate the show, and if you liked it, write a review, help us out, give us feedback. We love it. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Bleav in Softball. Again, that's BLEAV. You can always reach out to me on Twitter at Jenna Becerra01 and Instagram at Jenna Becerra as well. I am thrilled to have you back for season 4. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you soon.